RCW School District. I want to welcome you today as we give this presentation on creating entrepreneurial opportunities. And with us today is Craig Lindvahl. He's a CEO teacher as well as a nationally recognized educator and filmmaker. And he has lots of stories to tell about that. We've heard a few of them before we all got here. In more than 30 years of teaching, he has taught every grade from kindergarten through 12. And he has worked as a filmmaker, a musician, and has taken him to nearly 20 countries and has worked with young people from more than 25 countries. His television work is regularly seen on PBS stations around the country, and his most recent documentaries, including the behind-the-scenes look at the Cincinnati Reds, have enjoyed a major run on the Major League Baseball Network. He's a recipient of many awards, and I think I'll let him tell you about all of those. He says everything is true in my paper here, so I'm going to just let him prove that. How's that? Along with his teaching partner, the former Illinois Teacher of the Year, Joe Fothery, Lindvahl has participated in a number of groundbreaking educational endeavors, including the establishment of the nationally known filmmaking program and the now CEO, the Creating Entrepreneurial Opportunities class, which has earned him another award, which is the Teacherpreneur, is that how you say it? Yeah. Of the Year. So please welcome our speaker, Craig Lindvahl.
Thank you, and thanks for coming out on a Saturday afternoon. It just worked out that this is when I was up in this area and available to speak, so thanks for taking time out of your Saturday afternoon. That says a lot about you. I took a little drive around your town. I like very much what I see. I love your school over there. The town where I spent the first part of my life had a school that looked very much like that, so that makes me feel kind of at home. And communities this size do make me feel at home as well. The town where I've been employed as a teacher for all these years is a town of 1,500, and so I'm very comfortable in environments like this. But my other work has taken me to a lot of different places, and I've had such an odd life. And I won't go into a lot of it, but I mean, I work for the Cincinnati Reds, so I spend part of each season living in the stadium, where I do behind-the-scenes film projects. I've got one right now that's just about done. I just have been on the phone this week with meetings with Major League Baseball and the Reds. I hope this one will be released right before opening day. It's called A Ballpark Story, hosted by a 16-year-old kid who is an amazing story in herself. So I've lived this odd life. I've taught every grade K through 12, music and filmmaking. When I was about 50, my teaching partner was the Illinois Teacher of the Year. And he, while he was on sabbatical, took one of our kids and interviewed this local entrepreneur, Jack Schultz, who some of you have heard speak. And when they came out from that interview, the kid said, every student in America ought to do what I just did, because I just learned more about life and success and failure than I've learned in a very long time. So my teaching buddy went back to Jack and said, you know what we ought to do? We ought to have a class where kids just learn how to think. So you fast forward through a couple of years of really hard work on behalf of people just like you guys, to convince schools that something like this could work, to convince communities and business people that this kind of thing could work, to get the business investors together to fund the class. And then I came on board, because I typically try to wait until all of the hard work is done, and then I come in and try to be the hero at the end. So they came and approached me and said, would you be interested in teaching this class? And I said, you know, I'm 50 years old. I'm not looking to start something new in my life. I'm going to finish out my teaching career. I love what I do, and then I'll go do the filmmaking stuff, and you know, I'll be very happy doing that. But when they said we don't really want to use a textbook and we don't want to have a lot of tests and quizzes, we want it to be tied to real-world stuff, but we don't really have any idea how to do it, I was like, now that I'm interested in. I'm interested in just making something up as I went. And I'll be totally honest with you, I went through a couple of things of training during that summer about entrepreneurship education. And I came back and said to the people who hired me, I've made a huge mistake because I don't want to do any of this. It's all pretend stuff and activities and worksheets and this prescriptive stuff, and I'm worried that some of the stuff that's in here is only relevant to itself. Does that make sense? That there's vocabulary and activities and stuff that only make sense in entrepreneurship education, but nothing to do with business and entrepreneurship, just its own little thing. I didn't want to do that. And they said, well, then don't. Do whatever you want to do. So the first group of kids, and I just made this up as we went along, I can't really take a lot of credit for it other than the philosophy of it, which has stayed true to what I wanted to do. But it was people like you who really helped to figure out what works and what doesn't. So now there's sort of a structure and a routine that we know this stuff works, this stuff doesn't work. We've done a lot of things that didn't work very well, and that's how you learn. That's very entrepreneurial. So here we are now. And I want to tell you that the CEO network today is 15 classes in Illinois, Indiana, Minnesota. One of the fun experiences I have when I use a PowerPoint is I ask kids in other places, because I have a map of Indiana, Illinois, and Minnesota. They don't know what Minnesota is. Most of your kids here in Minnesota recognized it, by the way, but in other places, I've heard Idaho, Montana, Virginia was the worst one, and I'm like, Virginia's this way. You know, this one is this way, and oh, I thought you just turned it up on its end. I'm like, yeah, people usually do that when they show states. They like, turn it up and say, can you tell what it is now? So that's our network right now, and we have, at any given time, 2 to 3 times as many communities who want a class than we can support starting. We're trying to control the growth very carefully because this is not a prescriptive notebook that you just take and go do. There's other programs that do that. There's a magic to this that takes a lot of people, and so we feel like we need to be helping the communities, we need to be helping the teachers, all that kind of stuff. So let me now step back and talk just a tiny bit about education and why I think this sort of thing is so necessary. Every school I'm in, and I'm in places all over the country, every school I'm in is full of people who really care about kids. Not every single teacher, but pretty close. I mean, teachers really are dedicated to their craft, they're dedicated to their kids. That's the good news. The troubling news is that the system we've developed to teach kids is about 350 years old. So if Thomas Edison came back, a school is probably the only thing he'd recognize. So we do the same sit and get that we've done for 350 years. And in fact, look at the way we're sitting right now. This feels comfortable, doesn't it? This feels familiar to us, that we sit in rows and we listen to somebody lecture. Well, kids have moved beyond that. This new generation of kids we call millennials are probably the savviest kids we've ever produced. They are probably going to be the greatest generation we've ever produced, if we give them what they need. Do you know what they know how to do? They know how to learn. My wife will not get the new operating system for her phone because she knows how to use the old one. All right? So she views it as, I know this, I don't know this. Kids know it's a different version of the same thing. Kids know how to learn. Instinctively they know how to learn, and it's a good thing because back when phones were invented, all right, it took 20 to 30 years for a new invention to become part of the culture. Now it takes a few months. So their world is going to change repeatedly, repeatedly, and repeatedly. Well, they also know how to gather information. Most of us in here are old enough to remember if a teacher said, I want you to find out what the economic forecast is for Ireland for next year. Our thought would be, well, how am I going to find that? Kids go, just a minute. They won't necessarily be able to make sense out of it, but they can gather information. They've moved beyond the need to retain a lot of stuff. Now, I want to give you 2 examples. One which we know is good, one which we're not so sure. Are you old enough to remember typing on a typewriter? Mm-hmm. A manual typewriter? And do you remember the thought process of, do I know how to divide this word? And if I don't, I'm not using it. Do you remember the feeling as you got down about 3/4 of the way down the page and you started a sentence and it was no good and you thought, I am not typing this page again. I'll just figure out how to do something. Do you remember what this felt like? You pick up this little piece of white paper and you go R, backspace, mm-hmm. R, backspace, T, and then move on. Do you remember all that? Do you remember what it feels like to hit the return carriage? Do you remember all of that? None of that is relevant anymore. It's not that it never was, it's just not now. And guess what? When you type on a computer, you're not thinking about logistics, you're thinking about content. So now when we type on a computer, we're only thinking about what we're trying to say. Because we can always go back and change it. That's a completely different thought process, and that's good. GPS is one we're not sure about. I use GPS to get here today, so I'm in the right place, but guess what? I have no idea where I am. I have to go back to Alexandria after this. If I had to find my way back there, I don't have a map in the car. So if my GPS breaks, I don't even know what direction Alexandria is from here. So it robs us of the context of where we are. But we're not sure if that's valuable or not valuable. I don't know how to shoe a horse, but I'll probably be okay. So it may be that GPS will be so prevalent in the lives of our kids that it just won't be necessary to have that context of where they are. So some of this stuff we don't know yet how it's going to shake out. But we do know that the world inside of school is becoming disconnected from the world outside of school. So for too many of our kids, when we give them knowledge and information, it has a specific, immediate purpose of a test, a quiz, a grade, a class. That's why you're giving me this. So once we're done with that, I'm done with this. Kids don't think this way. They think this way. All of us who are professionals, successful professionals, we know that mastering the subject that we're involved in is critical, but it's this much. It's not this much. So if I go into a bank to get a loan, I'm not looking for a banker who knows how to do the paperwork. I assume he knows how to do the paperwork. What I'm looking for is a banker who knows how to solve problems and collaborate and follow through and do what they say they're going to do and communicate with me. That's what I want from them. All of us who are professionals know that that's the secret to success. I don't know about you guys as a teacher. My first day of teaching, I looked around and thought, did I miss something? Because I can already tell it's not about how much I know about music. It's about my ability to connect with the kids and challenge them. That's what it's all about. So I want to take kids from what we've created, and we call them entitled, but they're just well-trained. We've created these kids. Do you know what bumper bowling is? Where they put the bumpers in so you can't get a gutter ball? That's what we've tried to do for our kids. Out of love and concern and trying to protect them, we've tried to make it so that if I take the effort to pick up the ball, I better get a strike. Because I'm going through all this. I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. So we try to make it so they can't get a gutter ball. And that's too bad. So now they come out and say, well, I got my diploma, where's my job? Or one of the people I work for at the Reds tells me that sometimes a young employee will come up and say, what's your 5-year plan for me? And they'll say, well, that's kind of your thing to do that. It's not really our thing. So we've created the generation of kids that are learners, and they're very capable, and they're very entrepreneurial, and they are ready to go, but they lack these life skills. That's what they really lack. And those of you who hire people probably notice this in some of the people you hire, that you say, I have to tell you have to come to work every day? I didn't really think that was something I needed to tell you. I thought you could figure that out, that you're employed and you come. And that if you tell me you meant to do it is not the same thing as I did it. So that's what's behind a lot of stuff that goes on in this class, is that. Giving kids the idea that they own what they do, they own their behavior, they own their learning, they're responsible for what they do. Sometimes stuff goes wrong, and guess what? Sometimes it's your fault. Sometimes it isn't about being fair, it's just what happens. So here's what the class is. It was named by our first bunch of kids, by the way. They named it Creating Entrepreneurial Opportunities, CEO. And we launched in, and now it's developed into this. The class is funded by business investors, not the schools. So investors come in at $1,000 per year, typically a 3-year commitment. Everybody at the same level, so that nobody's saying, well, wait a minute, I put 10 grand in and my kid can't get in the class. So everybody's in at the same level. It's not a huge barrier to entry. I'm an investor in 3 or 4 classes myself. The class never meets in a school. It always meets in a business. Always. It's a real world thing. Everything's built around real life experience. So sometimes it's a nice place like a bank boardroom, and sometimes it's a factory workroom, and everything in between. So the students have a home base each quarter, and then from there they go out and do things, whether it's speakers or tours of the businesses and stuff like that. The class, by the way, meets 90 minutes a day, every day for a year, and it typically meets early in the morning. The class I taught started at 7:30. Some of the kids drove 30 minutes to get to class, and we typically started about 7:15 because the kids were there ready to go. So I kept getting up earlier and earlier and earlier because, 10 after 7, most of the kids were already there. Parents would tell me, I don't know who this kid is. Last year I had to use a taser to get him out of bed. And this year, 10 minutes to 7, they're out the door. They're dressed up and out the door. I don't know who this kid is. During the course of the year, last year my students visited 71 area businesses. Everything from manufacturing to service to retail, huge, small. Sometimes they were bookend businesses like maybe a 2-person graphics firm and then a big printing company. They would visit through the agricultural chain, for instance, a grain farm, a hog farm. Do you know what FS is up here, Farmer Supply? They're a broker, I think. Yep. Would that be the right term? A broker like that deals in commodities. They would visit a corner grocery store, a large grocery store, a family restaurant, a franchise restaurant, a high-end restaurant, where they get to see all the way through that chain of things, how things fit together. So they come out of the class with a pretty good idea of how maybe 4 or 5 dozen kinds of businesses run. They listened to 140 guest speakers last year. People like you guys who come in to share personal philosophies, business philosophies, their life stories. Sometimes it's specific business information. But what I love about this is when a kid writes a business plan for a business they're going to run, they need to know how to do the financials. It's not what do I have to know, it's I need to know this. I need to talk to a CPA. So now you've got 100 teachers in this class who come and share what they know. That's the exciting part. Stuff starts to rub off on these kids. They do write 2 to 3 business plans a year. Not so much for the document, but for the process. You're going to formulate a good idea, do good research, ask good questions, project what might happen, and then communicate it. I don't care what you do with your life. Those are critical skills. In fact, think about next week and the problems you deal with and the percent that come from poor communication, lack of communication, improper communication. If we could just teach them that one thing, think of what we could change. But these are not just for a grade. It's not necessarily for a competition. I got to move. I'm trying so hard to stay still.
Oh, that's right. No, you move.
Okay. It's so hard for me to stand still like that. And my voice is low, and it's soft, and it gets quiet, and then it makes you sleepy. So they write these business plans. I'm telling you, too, 99% of your kids think that those of you who own your own businesses already know what your revenues are going to be a year from November. And so when they write their first business plan, they come back and they call me El. El, how am I supposed to know what my revenue is going to be in 6 months? And I'm like, welcome, because nobody knows. What you do is exactly what you're doing. You do good research, you ask good questions, you draw on whatever experience you have, and then you guess. And then you work your tail off to make sure that that's what happens to the best of your ability. Twice a year, they present their business plans one-on-one to bankers and investors in maybe a room just like this. But when it's not just for a grade or a competition, where the point is to figure out what that person wants from you, but I'm going to go do this. Now it's compelling and it's urgent, and kids go, I want to know and I need to know. I'm getting out of order, so I'm going to forget stuff here. Each kid gets a mentor from the business community. One of the coolest things about this is they get a network of people established. So for instance, one of my kids last year had bracelets made, and they were manufactured overseas. Well, she had a mentor who knew how to do that. So she would leave class and she would Skype the factory in China and talk to her agent, talk to the factory to make sure things were going like they were supposed to. She knew how to bill of lading, she knew how to do all that stuff because she had this network of people to help her. Every day I get stuff from kids who want to know who do I talk to. I mean, every day I get these. The class runs a class business together, and typically it's an event because an event has a nice start, middle, end. You can do it in a couple of months. My kids last year ran a half-day business conference based on the essential ingredients of CEO. The point you need to know is that the kids do everything. They plan, they contract, they market, they sell. It's their deal. All the way through class, our teachers are constantly telling kids, this is your deal. It's totally your deal. You can't get a D on that. Those of you who own your business, you know what I'm talking about. You can't get a D on your business because you can't stay in business that way. So my students came back from Christmas last year. All right, so about January 3rd, the event was January 31st, and they had sold 17, I believe it was, seats at this conference. We had $8,000 in expenses. I said, I would give you an F so far, but that doesn't really make any difference because we owe somebody $8,000. So we can make signs that say, I like CEO better when somebody else does all the work, or I wish I'd done better, but we're having this event and we owe this money. Well, they ended up selling over 300 seats and they made $15,000 profit on this business. But kids don't really have that same thing in school. Do you follow what I'm saying? One of the things I don't like about grades is it's like a menu. If I want this grade, I do this much work. If I want this grade, I do this much work. I hate that we tie kids' effort. I want their best work and I want it on time. Because that's the way the world works. That's the way we grade in CEOs, as a matter of fact. And then kids start their own businesses. And these are real viable businesses. They're not pretend. So what are they? It's all over the place. On the conservative end, because there are always some straight A kids in the class, and I love it when they first come in the class because they're like, so how are you going to grade this, and what is it like, and is this the right answer? And everybody who's in business knows that most of the time you go, I don't know, I wish somebody would tell me if this is right. And the first time you say to those straight A kids, I don't know, they're like, no, that's not the way this is supposed to work. So for some of those straight A kids, it's maybe piano lessons or a yard mowing service. But for them, that's a huge stretch and leap. It's a huge stretch. When you feed off of tell me what to do and tell me what you want, to all of a sudden have to come up with your own, that's a huge leap. To the other end of the spectrum, which is kids who just, well, I'll give you a few examples. Last year I had, one girl had these bracelets made. She sold almost $20,000 worth of these bracelets. It's a cross that's sort of up and down this way, and then bracelet back here. There's several companies that make these, but she had them manufactured. She sold almost $20,000 worth. Another girl had a different kind of decorative bracelet made. Another girl had scarves manufactured. Another girl, I always get mixed up, it's the stuff you put on your eyelid. The makeup. Eyeshadow. She had eyeshadow made. Another kid made yard art out of scrap metal because he was a welder. Another kid had a car detailing business. A couple years ago, I had two boys who started converting vehicles to run on natural gas and propane. Now they've morphed their business. They sell the tanks. And the one kid, he just called me. It was either yesterday or the day before. And he said, I'm sitting in class in college, business 1, 2, 3, trying to pay attention. I'm getting texts from a customer who owes us almost $40,000. There was a mix-up. The tanks didn't all get loaded right. Now I got to figure out what tanks he doesn't have, but he's 2 weeks late paying us. How do I get the money out of him? Meanwhile, I'm supposed to be paying attention to this lecture. I love that he's 21 years old or something like that, and he knows this stuff. He's telling me this whole story about how he couldn't get back from school to load these tanks. He set all the pallets right in the middle of their warehouse. He tagged them all, and then a guy didn't load all the things. And so now he's got to figure out how to get these tanks to Michigan, but the guy hasn't paid. Should I go ahead and send them when the guy hasn't paid? I love it. These kids know this at 20 years old. Another girl, Lexi, who's been up here with me sometimes, she travels and speaks with me. She wrote a book about her experience in the class. She's working on a second edition of that. In fact, those of you who saw some Wilmer saw Lexi. And she has a new business, a traveling boutique, where she buys clothes wholesale. She goes to sororities, to business groups, to banks, stuff like that, and she hosts these shows. She'll make a couple of grand in 2 hours doing this. She turns her inventory over every 6 weeks or so. Her big struggle now, she's a junior in college. She's trying to balance this stuff. She's trying to figure out, do I get bigger by doing the Pampered Chef routine where now you sell for me and you sell for me? But then there's all this complication about, do you do it right? And so maybe I'll just have bigger shows. And maybe one of these days I'll have 5,000 women coming to my shows, and then I'll have an online store, and they'll buy from me because they think I think it looks good. So she's struggling. We have an appointment next week to have lunch together to talk about this growth. But once again, she's 20, not 40. For the kids who don't do well in their business, how much better to learn at 18, I can't make money like this, than to learn it at 38 when you just lost your house and your car. There are things that we all know that you can learn only by doing. In fact, most of what you and I know about our professions, we didn't learn in school, to be honest. We learned it by being out there doing it. That's the whole trick. Experiential learning is as old as people. We've always known that this works, but it's just sometimes we stray away from it, and I'm not really sure why we ever thought the testing that we do shows us anything that really matters. When's the last time somebody asked you about your GPA, for instance? It mattered for that long, didn't it? It mattered for your first job, and then after that, I mean, at 40 or 50 years old, nobody's going to say, what was your GPA? That's not what they want to know what you know about life and about doing things. So the troubling news is that our kids don't really have these skills like we want them to. Great news is, you do. So when you put your greatest hope, which is your kids, together with your greatest resource, which is you guys, not only does it change those kids, now it starts to change the way they look at Renville. Because I'm sure, Michelle, that you hear regularly from kids, oh, there's opportunity, but not here. There's nothing here. Well, you know what? You let kids go see all these places around your area and meet people like you, and all of a sudden, this looks entirely different. My students, and I live in a town about this size, there's a flour mill there. Well, all of the McDonald's biscuits east of the Mississippi come from their flour. I mean, it's just a little thing, but when kids see that, they're like, I will never, ever go into McDonald's the same way. I'll want to poke everybody and say, I know where that flour came from. I've seen it made. There's a place in Effingham, Illinois that makes these. They make almost 1 billion Coke product bottles a year. So my students know how these are made, which is really cool, by the way. And they know that it's $300,000 for a set of molds, and you need about 10 sets of molds per size. So when somebody at Coca-Cola decides to change this a little bit, you're looking at millions of dollars of investments. In fact, one time they changed the number of dimples in a Sprite bottle because it'll revolutionize our sales. Well, every size Coke bottle had millions of dollars in these molds to change that. Our kids know that truckers love to ship these because it only takes 10 minutes to load a semi, and it doesn't weigh anything. So your mileage is great. This stuff changes the way they look at everything. And that's what you want from your kids. So 2 or 3 years ago, I had 25 kids in the class. At the start of the year, 3 of them said they were interested in coming back as adults. At the end of the year, 21. Almost all of them said they were interested in coming back. Lexi, this girl I just talked about, the book in the Traveling Boutique, she's one who said, I don't want you to think I don't appreciate this because this was an incredible experience, but I'm not coming back here. She's from a town half the size of this one. But guess what she feels like now? That's where I want to be. That's where I have a network of people. That's where I have the most opportunity. Whatever it is I do with my life, I want it to be from there. And the other piece of good news is, for the first time in history, it doesn't really matter where your kids are. 95% of the things they can dream of doing, they can do right here. It wasn't that way for a lot of us. If you wanted certain kind of things, you had to go somewhere to do them. It's not that way anymore. I met with a kid of mine. He's got a phone case he has found. It's just a tiny bit thicker than this. You open the back of it. It's got a little slot to put a credit card, a key, and over here you can put a few bills. He says, you know, I forget my wallet all the time, but I never forget my phone. And so I said, well, where are you going to get these and how is it? Well, do you know what crowdsourcing is? Do you know what that is? That's where you take your business idea to a website like Kickstarter and you post it and then people fund it from that. Well, he found this on Kickstarter. So he's contacted the manufacturer. He's already worked out a wholesaling deal. He's already figured out how he's going to sell them. This is a thinker. Doesn't matter where he is. But that's a kid who's thinking this way, not this way, which is what you love. So what do you do to have a class? Well, you have to have a few things in place. You've got to have enough businesses to be investors in the class. How many do you need? Don't let me forget to tell you all, because I'll tell you exactly how many you need. You've got to have your schools on board, because that's where your kids come from. And you're talking about a geographic area probably where kids aren't driving on a daily basis more than about 15 or 20 miles. Now, the county where I taught, we had 6 school districts who fed in, and it was about 30 miles from one corner to the other corner. Mm-hmm. And we met mostly in the middle, but we went to all the communities. So kids just had to plan. They went to this school and we met that place that day. They just had to figure it out, so they did their transportation accordingly. So you need enough business investors. The schools have to be on board. That's basically it. So the class meets 90 minutes a day. The kids drive themselves to and from class like they do for health occupations, or I don't know what kind of programs you have here, if they're internships they do, or diversified occupations or anything like that. Same sort of deal. It's early in the morning. That way the kids aren't missing a lot of school. For some schools, they only miss first hour. For some, they miss first and second. It depends on the place. The kids get 2 high school credits for the class. It's possible they could get dual credit, if you know what that is. That's where they get community college credit. I know in Wilmer they're working on that. College credit is also a potential opportunity. One of our classes already gets 3 credit hours at the junior level of college junior, the 3rd year of college is what I'm trying to say, level. Plus they get a scholarship from that school, entrance into their MBA program, all that kind of stuff. Southern Illinois University is looking at granting 3 hours of college credit for the class. Sometimes things disappear in the abyss of higher ed, so they get like this close to doing the pilot, and then we don't hear from them for a month, and then they're this close again, and we don't hear from them for a month. But I'm confident that there will be opportunities within a couple of years for all of our classes to get college credit for this class. When you think about it, it's that level. It's a graduate college level kind of course. It's the kids are leading the discussions, they're engaged in what's going on, they're doing this real advanced level work. It's an appropriate thing for them to do. How many investors do you need? Well, 95% of the budget is the teacher. So the teacher is a half-time position. It's 90 minutes a day with the kids, and in the balance of the morning, as you can imagine, if you've got 100 guest speakers and 50 business visits, there's a lot of planning and networking and getting stuff together for that. You also want to have people like you in the class all the time. So once a class gets matured, the class I taught is now in its 6th year. It's a rare day that it's just the teacher and the students. There's always 4 or 5 people who just come to hang out. That's great for the kids to see and to sort of by osmosis gather some of the stuff you wanted to know how to do. So the teacher is 95% of the budget. How much does that cost? Depends how much the teacher makes. I made $340,000 last year as a teacher. So it took... You sort of varied between, you look spoiled, and I want to go teach there. Now that was career earnings. It took me 34 years to make that. But if your teacher makes 50, then you need 25 investors. If your teacher makes 70, you need 35, all right? You need about another 10 to 12 investors for an annual report, for social gatherings. Without my PowerPoint, I got to think. And other assorted various things that are very critical, but I just don't feel like telling you about this. I have started recommending to communities that they provide maybe a couple $1,000 stipend for the teacher, because this is a half-time teaching job, but it is a full-time job. And so the summertime stuff and the nighttime stuff and all this, it consumes your life because all good reasons, but it consumes your life. So about 10 more for that. So now let me back up. So on an ongoing basis, you probably need 40 to 50 investors. That's about what you need. And you notice I'm not talking about dollars, because that gets intimidating. When you think about $50,000, you go, we can't pull $50,000 out of here. But when you think about village boards, county boards, I don't know what you call your entities up here, economic development agencies, banks, corporations, individuals who are just interested, hospitals, medical people, all kinds of different people can invest in these classes. And when you start thinking about, can we find 40 to 50 people who understand the economic development component of changing the way kids look at this place? When you look at the average age of this community, which I don't know what it is, but you're going to get to an age where you can't come back, where it's just too old. So we got to attract these kids to come back. Well, you do that by interacting with them and being involved. You can find 40 or 50 people who are involved in that, or interested in that. A timeline for starting a class. The earliest you could start would be the fall of 2015. Now you have the initiative foundations, which is great because your money needs to flow through a foundation. That's critical that it happens that way. And your initiative foundation, which you would be SWIFT, right? They're set up to do that. They know how to do that. And they can guide on other things as well. But if you want to be in fall of 2015, we'll probably start no more than 12 in Illinois, Indiana. We may do North Dakota, I'm not sure, but I mean, we'll start 10 to 12 classes total. And we already have almost 30 communities who are in various levels of seriousness. So it's a competitive process to get a class. I typically wouldn't come do this, but I'm just up in your state and I'm just thrilled that it worked out that I could stop through here and talk to you today. So this spring is when you want to get investors in your schools on board. Often what happens is a community brings me back to speak and get everybody all charged up. And if it works out right, I bring a kid with me, because there's nothing like meeting the product of the class. This Lexi that I've talked about, there's 2 classes in Indiana that started because of her. I'll never forget the day this business person stood up and said, if it does that, we're having it. If it produces kids like that, we got to have this. So by this fall, you would want to have signed an agreement with the institute that I run to get a class started in the fall of 2015. Okay? Now, also financially, but this is different than ongoing. Those are your ongoing expenses that I was talking about with your investors. There's a one-time fee of $20,000 for the institute. That's for materials, training, mentoring, curriculum, all that kind of stuff. All right? That doesn't matter where that comes from. And typically, that comes from a foundation or from a bank or from a corporation or somebody who says, yeah, we got to have this, I'll take care of that. And we are not a for-profit organization. We're just trying to be self-sustaining, the institute that I run. So we provide manuals for the community. There's a board that governs the class, and there's a manual with bylaws and committee structure and how you do all this stuff. There's a manual for the teachers, which is both conceptual and specific. There is training in the summer for the teacher. There are weekly meetings online with the teacher. There's a teacher summit every summer for the current teachers to come in. I continue to create content for the class so that the teachers have that to use. And then we're just in constant contact with the teachers who want to know stuff and how to handle things. So that may be a little jumbled because I didn't have my PowerPoint to keep me on track with that. But that's the essential ingredients of what CEO is and how it works. And I am happy to answer any questions that you have because you just got a whole bunch of information in a very short amount of time.
You said there's $20,000.
Did you raise your hand? Did I call on you? Sorry.
She's in the game now.
Yeah. So no questions? Yes, ma'am.
Can I go to the bathroom?
Yeah.
You said there's an initiative, $20,000 fee. Is there like an annual fee after that then?
Yes, there is. Thank you so much. In that 10, that was one of the things I didn't think about. Did you already know the answer to this?
No, but I just question everything about it.
That is a good... That's the thing. So there's a $3,000 annual renewal fee after the first year for the continued involvement of me and my people with your teacher and your kids and stuff like that. Thank you. So I forgot about that. I will tell you that in the dozens and dozens of communities I've talked with, raising the money has never been the issue. The only issues I ever have is sometimes school people are reluctant because it doesn't look like school. They don't recognize it right away. They feel like, I've got enough going on. I don't need another thing. But typically the money, our original class in Effingham, it took them 3 days to raise $150,000, which was 50 investors who signed up for 3 years.
So you're saying 40 to 50 investors, so like $1,000? So like $50,000 a year.
And a lot of that, you understand, depends on the cost of the teacher.
Right.
Okay.
How many kids are in a community raises $50,000? How many kids does that service?
Now, I want you to understand, we advocate for multiple communities to be involved. That's a healthy thing in every way. Economic development-wise, it's healthy. Culturally, it's healthy. Jack Schultz, who often goes out to speak with me, I go out to speak with him. Let's make it clear who's the star. But he calls it Friday Night Lights syndrome, where we play each other on Friday night, so we got to hate each other the rest of the week. Getting your kids involved with each other is a great way to sort of break that stuff down. 22 is the top number of kids you should have. You should not have more than that. This is a really, and I'll talk about the kids and the teacher. But there's no formula. Some programs, they'll say like, okay, your school gets X number of slots based on the school population. We don't believe that's a good idea for this at all because it fluctuates. And so you're looking for the 15 to 22 most appropriate kids. Now, who are those most appropriate kids? They have to have 2 qualities. Beyond these 2 qualities, it doesn't make any difference. I have found that they'll be fine as long as they are trustworthy and as long as they have a good work ethic. So much of this is self-directed. If they don't have a good work ethic, you're in trouble. Because this is not a class full of assignments. My students would tell you, we don't have homework. And somebody will say, you mean you don't do work outside of class? And they'll say, we do all kinds of work outside of class. It's just not assigned. Those of you who own your own business, you know what I'm talking about. You don't measure it like that. You just got stuff you got to do. And then the trustworthy part, partly because it's self-directed, they're representing you, your community, young people in general, your school. You have to be able to trust them to be where they're supposed to be and do what they're supposed to do. It's not the kind of class where the teacher can spend a lot of time on rules and punishments. It's about expectations. That's what it's about. The teacher, as you might guess, has to be the right person. It has to be a major league teacher. Now, if you have the right teacher, everything else goes really well. If you have the wrong teacher, almost none of it goes well. So what does that teacher have to have? And by the way, the institute that I run helps in that process. We have a personality assessment that we use that helps identify if there's any red flags. Yesterday I sat down with a couple of teacher candidates. Earlier this week in a different community I sat down with 3 teacher candidates. So we give our input on that. And I have a person who works for me who handles all the education issues. Accreditation, certification, all that stuff. As an entrepreneur, I'm not interested in all the rules and regs and all that. She handles all that stuff. But your teacher has to be the most excited learner in the room. They have to be a self-starter, obviously. And they have to be a relationship builder. Michelle, you know what I'm talking about, but in school, your great teachers build relationships with kids. And when they do that, the kids don't act up. They just don't. Great teachers always do that, and then the kids don't act like that. So your teacher has to be able to do that so you head off those problems before they start. So if you came to my class and said to my students, what's the punishment if you come late to class? The kids would say, why would you do that? Why would you come late? Why would you not dress appropriately? Why would you not do the work you're supposed to do? I don't understand why that would be an option. So your teacher has to be able to build that. Is it a business teacher? Sometimes. I mean, I came from music and filmmaking, but I've had my own business for a long time. So in Illinois, I got what's called a provisional certificate. I know in Minnesota, while I don't know any of the regs, I know you have some alternative certification possibilities. If your community college provides a dual credit class, they can provide the instructor. Their certification rules are broader than public education. Does this make sense? So in Illinois, we've got a place where the community college is offering the class to high school students as a dual credit class. They've got 2 people who qualify as adjuncts to the college, all right? But they don't have business education certificates for public ed. They don't need them because they're working for the community college. Does that make sense? So there are ways to creatively think about making sure you have the right person teaching the class. Boys and girls, those were 2 excellent questions. Who else has a question? Yes, ma'am?
After you were speaking alone, we had a question on the way home. If you have a class of juniors and seniors, the juniors, do they have the opportunity to go on as a senior?
Okay, so 2 for 3. That's not bad. 2 good questions and a stinker. That's, that's not too bad. That's actually a very good question. Some places only allow seniors in.
Okay.
I'm guessing that the communities you're thinking about drawing from are all small like this. Is that a fair statement? I mean, Wilmer's a much larger place. So some places just offer it to seniors, some juniors and seniors. In my class, I had juniors and seniors, and I considered each year taking one back for the second year as an intern. And I told the kids who were interested, I'm not creating a separate curriculum for you. Each year of CEO is different because you do things in a different order and different things happen and there's different things in the news and all that. Plus the kid is different. So they could go through exactly the same experience the second time. Haven't you ever had that in your life where you go back to a place and you go, how could I have missed this? It's because you weren't ready when you were there the first time. And they take a lead in the class business and stuff like that. So they work out with their school some kind of internship or independent study or something like that. So yes, I have done that with my kids. I've never done it with more than one, but I have done it. Mm-hmm. Did you not already ask a question, though?
Sorry.
Were you not listening?
I work in the office by myself, so
So when you get around people, you just can't help it.
Well, I just have a question. So because if we wouldn't have a retired teacher that was inspirational to the students, could they help out the teacher? I mean, if there's a lot of prep work and stuff.
We have, in one of our classes in Illinois, it is a retired teacher. And I don't know what your rules are here. We're not allowed to teach more than 100 days as a retired teacher, or you give up your pension. Well, if you know anything about Illinois, we may give it up anyway. But
I know, but you need that salary.
But what she does is for 90 minutes a day, she's the teacher. For the rest of the morning, she's the paraprofessional liaison with the business community. So then it doesn't impact. And in Illinois, it's not like if I teach 90 minutes today, I haven't blown one day. I've only blown 90 minutes. So by just making it 90 minutes a day that they're in contact with the kids, they're able to not mess up their retirement. She has a person who comes and helps with some of the other stuff. In one of our other communities, there are 2 people who are going to team teach. I'm anxious to see how this works out. And they're going to kind of split up where one does mostly the stuff with the kids and one does mostly the logistics. The last 2 years I taught, the institute that I run, that board wanted the transition to go smoothly. So they hired him 2 years ago to just be in class with me. Last year I taught, but he did all the rest of it. So we have some background in how you split that stuff up. And then this year he took over the class. So it can work where somebody who's really inspirational does a lot of the work with the kids. Somebody else does the legwork of getting everything set up. The only downside to that is that that teacher is the hub of everything. And so if it's somebody else making all the arrangements, it's not quite the same as if it's the teacher that they know. I will tell you that in all the years I've taught, I don't technically teach now. I just go around to our classes and visit and stuff, but I still consider myself just teaching on a larger level. But in all the years I've spent as a teacher, which is 35 now, this is the best thing I've ever seen. It's at the heart of why I became a teacher, because it makes better people. And it's at the heart of the way kids are ready to learn, because they're ready to be responsible in ways that we don't allow them to be responsible in school. Our system is predicated on kids can't do anything without it being prescripted. You know, that we feed it to them and we tell them this matters because, and you do this because we tell you. Kids are ready to move beyond that. There's a whole movement in this country called academics, which is kids going around the system, not through it. So it's going to happen whether we are a part of it or not. But this is the thing. It's not the answer for every kid in every school in every town, but for the kids who are in it, it's completely transformational. And for you people, it's completely transformational. Because if you come and talk about your business, for instance, to a group of teenagers who are engaged and interested in what you know, that'll change you forever. Because I don't know if you're like me, but we have this notion of what kids are like. And if you had 8 high school kids in here right now, do you know where they'd be? They'd be over in the corner by themselves, right? You'd be scared to go talk to them. They'd be sitting like this, doing this. Boys are horrible, because high school boys have to show you they're disengaged. They have to go like this.
No, I got it.
Right? Girls do this. Or they think this. I was in a school yesterday for girls, sitting like this. Nobody ever told them that you don't do this in a business meeting. Nobody ever tells kids that you don't take notes like this in a business meeting. You just don't do that. And I always tease my students. I'm like, if you're disengaged, that's just fine, but you don't have to let me know. All right? I can probably tell. There's no reason for you to let me know. And when you're an 8th grade boy, and you're out somewhere with your parents and you're doing this business, whatever. Nobody thinks that poor kid, look at those adults bothering that kid. They all think, well, it's a good thing they don't stay 14 forever. It's just backwards from what kids think it is. So they don't know how to do what you guys know how to do in the very basic ways like this. Know how to sit and be engaged. They don't know how to do any of that because we've never really taught them. Some of them know how to shake hands, for instance, and look you in the eye. Do you know what they don't know how to do? Is what comes next. Having the conversation, you know, you and I talking before the meeting, they don't know how to do that. They need help. They just need help with that. Once you give them that help, they cannot go back to being the way they were before. Because now they know what they know. And the world changes completely. You'll change, they'll change. It's just the best thing I've ever seen. I appreciate the chance to share all this stuff with you today, and I'm happy to stick around for as long as any of you have questions. If you were too chicken to ask in front of the other boys and girls, like you were not too chicken, you did it. I just got to tell you this one last thing. This has nothing to do with this stuff. I've taught every grade, kindergarten to 12. I love the kindergarten kids because they're excited about freaking everything. So if you say, you know what we're going to do today? I'm going to take my elbow and rub it in your underarm. Kid will go, oh, I was hoping we'd do that. That's like my favorite thing to do. And if you say to a group of kindergartners, who knows about nuclear physics? It's, oh, I got to tell you. And then they just want to tell you something. Because this one time, and meanwhile, you know, they're working at both ends because they're not sealed up yet. Girls get sealed up. Guys